Okay, folks, it's that time of the week. Another episode of Cowboys Overtime here on StarTelegram.com, brought to you by Window Nation. I am Fort Worth Star Telegram columnist Mac Engel. He is Cowboys Know-It-All, Mr. Nick Harris, live from the Star in Frisco, where Nick and I were both at the Dallas Cowboys' most recent loss, this time 34-10 on Monday night. They lose the Governor's Cup. Apparently that exists. To the Houston Texans, 34-10, terrible game. Although we convinced ourselves it was actually closer than it really was because it was a one-score game, kind of two-score game, and it was just kind of an ugly deal. And then the fourth quarter was a mess. There is absolutely no home field advantage for this team right now. Not only is the roof falling apart, this team can't win at home and is the only professional sports team in North America that has not won a home game in the entire calendar year. The Dallas Cowboys lost to the Green Bay Packers in the 2023 NFL playoffs that were played in January, and they have not won a home game this season. Nick, do you see, well, first of all, do you see them winning a home game between now and the end of the year? The end of the year.
The best possibility is the Giants on Thanksgiving. The Giants just turned to Tommy DeVito to be their quarterback the rest of the way. They're falling apart. Brian Daboll's job is in question. The Giants are arguably more in peril than the Cowboys, so that would be your best chance on Thanksgiving.
You know, we've talked. There's so it's odd because we're seeing now the results are basically the same thing every week. They've dropped 5 in a row. They're 3-7. I would say, you and I talked about this last night. At best, they'll win 2 more games. Maybe they can win a third and so improve to 6 wins on the season. I still think there is a chance, given the way this team has played and the success that they had for the 3 previous years. Nick, I still think there's a chance Mike McCarthy might come back. Do you?
I wouldn't put it out of the realm of possibility. I think it's one of the options on the table. You look at what Jerry Jones is saying in post-game availabilities. You see the confidence that he's putting back into Mike McCarthy. It's not the sign, at least what he's saying, it's not the sign of a GM or an owner that does not trust the head coach. And he has asked multiple times, do you feel like this team is still playing for Mike McCarthy? He says, yes, I do. Any notion of that is overblown. He's continued to put confidence right back into Mike. Now, if he had all of this confidence about these 3 previous 12-5 seasons, why was there not a contract put in place over the offseason? I think you have to still look back on that and see that this was a prove-it year for Mike McCarthy, and he hasn't proven anything. Have injuries mounted? Absolutely. But I think where it gets complicated if he decides to bring back Mike McCarthy for another year is, do you bring back his entire staff for another year? And is it just 1 year? Is it just 2 years? How do you handle that? And I think that's where it gets a little bit more difficult. But I think it's still something that is on the table. I was talking with a friend this morning who's just a Cowboys fan, and I love to kind of get his take on things from the fan perspective. And I told him, I said, I'm not betting on it, but don't be surprised if McCarthy is back next year. He said, there's no way. I'm just saying for the fans out there, I think it's within the realm of possibility. I think it's an option on the table.
I think it's about a 33% chance. I'm an adamant believer that they're not going to replace him now, only because there's nobody on that staff who is an immediate successor. There's nobody. So if they're not going to replace him now, then you're coming down to just 2 choices. So at 33% is just, to me, it's really almost more of a 50-50 thing. I think you hit the nail on the head. They did some things, and you alluded to it in a story that you wrote last week, sort of a comprehensive look at how the Cowboys are where they are today. And of all the developments that you've seen in the last 2 or 3 weeks, what's the one, or even 2, Nick, that to you as a Cowboys observer or even fan, and I know you're not a fan necessarily, but what are the 1 or 2 developments that you would say are the most disheartening for the future of the team looking at 25, 26, and 27?
I have to think about injuries, one, because especially as you look at your quarterback that you just signed through 2028, who I think you can officially mark as injury prone at this point. He's coming off a torn hamstring, and he had the dislocated ankle. We saw him in the boot before the season started. Is he dealing with tendonitis in that ankle? We've seen him deal with a thumb, a shoulder over the course of the last few years. You can't anticipate him staying healthy for 4 years, which means, and you wrote a good article a couple weeks ago about how they need to go draft a running back, or not a running back, a quarterback. I don't know if I agree with drafting a quarterback in the first round. That might be where we have a little bit of a disargument.
They're not going to. They're not going to. But yeah, go ahead.
I do believe that drafting a quarterback would benefit this team.
Okay, so let me hang on. I'm going to cut you off with that because
Yes.
I want to ask this before you finish that answer. They're going to get, let's say they get a top 5 pick, and there's 9 teams right now that are in serious contention for a top 5 pick. I mean, there's some really bad teams going right now, but those teams, because they're going to play each other, they're going to get to 4 and 5, and it's just a question of whether or not the Cowboys can just fall backwards into 5. But let's just play this out. Dak Prescott is on a monster contract. Shedeur Sanders is there at 5. Who knows what this is going to look like? Because I think the Jets obviously play a big part of it. The Titans play a big part of it. And whether or not, those teams move forward with their quarterbacks. If the Jets think they can get something else out of Aaron Rodgers, clearly he's done. Any of these other teams. Shedeur is sitting there at 5. He is probably the best drafting quarterback in this class, I think, right now. Carson Beck, you and I talked about it. The kid at Georgia has thrown himself out of the first round, but Shedeur is sitting there at 5.
Cam Ward, he's in the conversation, but yes.
Cam Ward's a terrific player. He's done a great job. But Shedeur is sitting there at 5, and the Cowboys can get him on a rookie deal. You're looking at 4 years. You're looking at 5 years, and you can do it. You could do it theoretically. Do you think they would?
I don't think they would. I think if that pick was super valuable, then they could trade out of it, move back to 7. If the Titans, let's say, are picking at 7, then they get value out of that. Now, if we're talking next year, maybe that's when you start having that conversation, because then you have 2 years that you have that rookie quarterback after Dak is already gone. And then they can kind of work in the Jordan Love method of developing a guy, letting him sit behind, as Jordan Love did behind Aaron Rodgers. Let this new guy sit behind Dak Prescott for a couple of years and let it work out. So maybe Arch Manning in 2026. How about that?
There we go. Okay. All right, go back to your answer before I cut you off about the disappointments and the ones that to you are more concerning for 25 and 26.
Cap mismanagement. And this is a very, very loaded topic. We could have 55 podcasts about cap and then how it pertains to this team specifically, because there's so many intricacies, not only to the salary cap, but how the Cowboys handle it. And it's something I honestly, personally need to get more knowledgeable about, just because it is something that is super over encompassing. It's super detailed. It's super layered. But to make it as basic as possible for the issues that I think the Cowboys are facing when it comes to the cap right now is I don't think that they see avenues where they can move around the cap how other teams do. For example, you look at the Saints. This is still a team that is able to be active in free agency. Granted, they're not going and getting the Saquon Barkleys or the Derrick Henrys, but they're active in free agency. They're able to re-sign their guys like Alvin Kamara. Chris Olave's on the docket. They're able to do those things, and they are in quote-unquote cap hell every offseason, but they figure it out. You could look at a team like the Eagles. This is a team that has signed their guys in Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown, Jalen Hurts. They went out and got Saquon Barkley. They went out and got C.J. Gardner-Johnson. They're drafting well in Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. So that team is figuring out the cap. They're figuring out avenues. I don't think this team is figuring out avenues to maneuver around the cap. And if they were, they would have been more active in free agency last year, and then this past offseason, and how it pertains to the future. I don't think you can anticipate this team finding those avenues to maneuver around the cap for 2025 and beyond. And they're going to need help in free agency next year. There's no doubt about it. They do have 10 draft picks as it sits right now, but they have more than 10 needs. And they're going to have to figure out something in free agency. They're going to have to bring some sort of veteran presence to the field. And I don't know how active they can be if they continue to use their cap strategies at this point.
Well, this started years and years ago when they had an off season where they went out and signed Brandon Carr, who was the top free agent defensive back on the market. They gave him a huge deal for then, And they signed some other guys, some other veterans to bigger contracts.
Yeah.
And they never felt like they got the bang for their buck on the deal. And their attitude, I remember talking to Stephen Jones about it. Their attitude was, we have to hit on these ex players. What I mean by ex, I don't mean like former players. And then we have to just keep churning them. The guys who really pan out, we'll give them the big dollars, our own guys like CeeDee Lamb, guys like Dak Prescott. But those 4th and 5th round picks that we develop and turn into good players, well, when it's the opportunity to pay them and they're not the top tier, we're going to have to let them go. And then we're going to replace them with the draftees coming down the line. Well, that's great. But it also assumes that your batting average on those picks is going to be exceptional. And you and I both know that it's drafting guys. It's a 50-50 proposition at best. And you're just going to go through some periods. We're going to have some down periods because and if you're going to be competitive, then you're going to have to go in the market and overpay to correct on the misses. Now it's just a question of how much are you going to have to overpay? And the Cowboys' attitude, again, this was years ago. They didn't want to do it. They just didn't want to do it because they had done it before. And that last time they did it with Brandon Carr, who was a good pro, who was a really good, reliable pro. He just wasn't worth the deal that they gave him, which was not his fault. But that's where it stems from. And they really haven't deviated from it. And I wonder now, given how poorly this season has gone, if they look at it and say, okay, we're going to have to do something this time. Because if not, we're staring down the barrel of another 5-win season. Okay, let's move on. There is one. Go ahead.
I will say one thing about that. There is a feeling within the building that the cap issues that they faced in 2024 are the same, if not worse, in 2025. I don't believe that to be the case.
But they always say that.
Building feeling. That is the building feeling. So
take that. They always say that.
Yeah.
They've been using that thing forever. And then it comes back down to, okay, if you're here again, somebody screwed up.
Yeah.
And it's not Jerry. It's not. It's Steven. And he's not going to get fired.
I think it's the trust that Steven puts into people around him. I think it's
please explain that.
I think it's the decision makers outside of Steven that Steven trusts as word, and then that moving on to decision making.
It's interesting. Okay. All right. I do think, one unfortunate element to this I've thought is that Jerry gets painted as some football boob. He's not a football boob. He's not. And you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
Jerry and Steven trust the people they hire, whether it's Will McClay. Will's a terrific pro, works like a dog. Mike McCarthy, Jason Garrett, assistant coaches, scouts. They trust those guys. They really do. And that they empower them, which is great. That's what you want as an employee. But when it comes to this cap, if they're going to rely on this as a constant crutch, then I think sometimes it's a fair question and say, okay, if it's a constant problem, then why haven't you addressed it and improved it? And it comes down to the comfortability that the management has in running the Cowboys, knowing ultimately, well, it's our name on the checks. We're fine. Okay, Candy is scolding us. We need to move on to the next topic, she says. Thanks, Candy. She's half asleep. Okay, why isn't Trey Lance playing more? I think I know the answer, but they went out and they gave up a 4th round pick. They gave him 1st round money to basically sit on the bench and do nothing. The season is gone. Nick, walk me through this one. Why isn't Trey Lance playing?
Well, the direct answer from Mike McCarthy and Jerry Jones yesterday is that Cooper Rush gives this team the best chance at winning. And, this team still wants to win at the end of the day, and they feel like Rush is still the answer for that. How did Rush play in comparison to last week? Completely different. Is he an NFL winning caliber quarterback at this point that can manage an offense? No, because I came out of that game yesterday thinking, how the hell did Dak Prescott win 3 games?
Can you believe they beat Pittsburgh? They won at Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and that's a huge credit to Dak. I think fans need to be looking around and being like, wow, Dak, I think needs to be getting a little bit more credit for those 3 wins than what he's been given. But Do I want to see Trey Lance start at right now? No, I don't.
No.
I want to see him 20 snaps though. On a 4th and 2 on the goal line when you need to convert to make it a 1-score game. Why isn't Trey Lance on the field? That is mind-boggling to me. Again, we could have 55 podcasts about that 4th and 2 and the play call about that and how they managed that was awful. But why don't you throw Trey Lance on the field in that situation? Late in the game, why don't you throw Trey Lance in these situations? Just give the defense something that they haven't seen throughout the course of a game, and let Trey Lance maximize his athleticism.
Make him think about it.
Around him.
Yes, make a linebacker, make a defensive end think about it. Force them to pause when that ball is snapped, just to look back to see what he's doing, and that might buy you a touchdown in that situation. I think the only time we're going to see Lance, I think this coaching staff has made up its mind about Trey Lance. So is the NFL, for that matter. So if we're going to see him play, it's not going to be until the final 2 games of the regular season when they decide, okay, let's just see what you can do. And maybe he plays okay and he plays himself into a contract for a team next season. It's not going to be here, but that's the only scenario where I can really see, or I even really want to see him play. I think they've made up their mind, and he's a great kid. He's a super nice guy, but I think ideally, if you're trying to win, and Mike McCarthy made that clear last night, these players deserve a chance to win. And when you say that, that means we're not tanking it for a 5th round for the 5th overall pick, or to develop some rookie free agent guy who may not be here in a year. We're doing this to try to win games for ourselves, and we owe it to ourselves to do that. And right now, that means playing Cooper Rush. Okay, last topic before we take a break. We've thrown this out. It's consistent with how the season has gone. Their best defensive player is going to be up for a monster contract. He could be the highest paid defensive player in the league this time next year. Any chance at all the Dallas Cowboys would trade, rather than to do that deal, trade Micah Parsons?
It's a thought that has been kicked around, I would say, more so the media.
Oh, yeah.
Is it something that's been brought up in the building? Yes, they bring up a lot of possibilities. Is it something that I think they would do? No. And Micah Parsons had given a quote, or he actually told the media a story a couple of weeks ago, kind of impromptu during one of his availabilities before he decided that the media hated him. He talked about a story when he was at the Super Bowl last year in Las Vegas, and he was coming out of his hotel. He wasn't planning on going to the game. He was just there for Super Bowl week, hanging out. And he was standing outside of his hotel waiting for an Uber. And Jerry Jones was driving by. And Jerry rolled down the window and said, "Hey, you going to the game?" And he's like, "No." He's like, "Well, do you want to go to the game?" And he was like, "Sure." And Micah hopped in his black SUV, and they'd go to the game and sit in Jerry's suite and talk the entire game, just about future, talk about life, talk about business, talk about everything. That, I think, speaks to his relationship with Jerry. And time in and time out, throughout Jerry Jones's ownership, we could take this all the way back to 1989. There's a player, if there's a coach that has a really strong relationship with Jerry Jones, he's going to keep them there longer than they should be there. And it has happened way more often than not. And
I think Zeke Elliott coming back.
Exactly. You could talk about Jason Garrett. He stayed around longer than he should have. There's multiple other instances. Off the top of my mind, I can't think of any more. But this is going to be a guy that they're going to drop the bank for. They're going to break the bank for. He's going to be the highest paid defensive player of all time. Might be the highest paid non-quarterback of all time. And it's only going to further extenuate those cap issues that they have. But if they look at a reality where they can't make it work with the cap, then I think it's a possibility. I think it's something that needs to be thrown around, because you want Micah Parsons to be a leader. And I don't think he has leadership qualities. He needs people around him to have that type of leadership quality. That guy has been DeMarcus Lawrence. DeMarcus Lawrence is no longer going to be that guy, because there's a very good chance he's playing for the Washington Commanders next year. I don't see a reality where Micah Parsons is the leader of your team. Are you going to pay somebody that type of contract with that in mind? I think that's going to have to be the question.
He needs an adult alpha in that room who will sit and pull him inside and say, "We're not doing this." Yeah. And I don't see that scenario coming on this roster anytime soon. We've got more to talk about here on Cowboys Overtime, but first, Let's hear from our friends at Window Nation.
Window Nation, the star of window replacement and proud partner of the Dallas Cowboys, can help you fill the house this season with savings. Buy 2 windows, get 2 free, and make no interest payments for 60 months, 5 full years. Fill your house for a customized authentic Dallas Cowboys jersey while supplies last. You could even help fill the Cowboys house and win tickets to a game. Visit windownation.com/Cowboys now for details. Call 866-95-NATION. Window Nation, proud partner of the Dallas Cowboys.
Thank you very much, Window Nation. Not sure why you're doing this, but we appreciate it. Back here for Cowboys Overtime. I'm Mac Engel. That's Nick Harris. Okay, one thing, yes.
The Window Nation repair roofing.
That's a good one.
Trying to plug our
guys. Roofs, too. It's okay, though. It's okay. It's totally okay. All 15-year-old billion-dollar venues eventually – the parts, the panels of the ceiling, they all do. All the good ones do it. Exactly. You know what I mean? All of them. Vatican, every place. It's totally normal. You and I bemoaned about something last night, and which is the Dallas Cowboys' recent draft picks. Now, I think, there we go. Specifically as it relates to one, and that is rookie tackle Tyler Guyton. We can talk about tight end Luke Schoonmaker, who was a second-round pick last season. You've said it. I think they've pretty much made their mind up on Luke. Mozzie Smith, the first-round pick, also from Michigan last year. He's playing. I don't think he's doing a whole lot. He played a great game against the Giants, and that appears to have been the outlier. But I did want to talk about this class, and let's go back to the last 2 classes. Will McClay deserves a lot of credit for a lot of good picks that he's had. We can name a whole bunch of guys. But there are some really troubling signs that last class, that the 2023 class and now the 24 class, there's trouble in doggy land. Tyler Guyton is a guy that when I've seen him play, I'm like, the ability is there, but God, he looks raw. I asked Mike McCarthy about him last night. He said he just needs to play. What do you make of the next season or 2 for Tyler Guyton?
This is my initial impression on Tyler Guyton, and I'm going to stick with this until he gives me a reason not to. When he was drafted, 26th overall, I had said on the draft show at that point that he's not going to be a guy we look up at a year from now and say, hey, that's one of the better first-round picks. But I would be surprised if we look up 4 years from now and we don't have that conclusion on him. He's a guy that came into the NFL with only 14 career starts at tackle. He started college at defensive tackle on the defensive side of the ball, playing at TCU. Transferred to Oklahoma, got moved to right tackle, and had 14 starts there. So we are only about 3 or 4 weeks away from him doubling his career starts in his rookie year in the NFL. I am under the impression that the plan was not to start Tyler Guyton in week 1. I think the plan was to start Chuma Edoga at left tackle. Chuma Edoga gets hurt in training camp. He's working his way back. Mike McCarthy said last week that Chuma returning will put healthy competition back at left tackle. That, to me, tells me that Chuma Edoga is a legitimate candidate to be a starter at left tackle moving forward. And if that is the case, then that means he was to begin with. For Tyler Guyton, Mike McCarthy's right. He needs time. He needs experience. He needs snaps. Do I think those snaps need to be coming at left tackle? I don't think so. I think it's time to move him to the right side. And if contracts be damned, that there's a situation that they have with Terrence Steele that I can't see him starting 17 more games next season, and an injury-prone Dak Prescott being safe doing that.
So let's go into Cooper Beebe. He was a guy that they sort of felt like they fell into, a rookie from Kansas State, and that position has been a bugaboo for this team since Travis Frederick retired unexpectedly a number of years ago. They had Tyler Biadasz, who was a little too small, and it just never really seemed settled. When you look at Beebe and the way he's progressed, do you think that's the viable long-term option for this team at that position?
I think it can be, absolutely. Because what I see from Cooper Beebe right now in game 10 of the season, I feel like is what you were getting out of Tyler Biadasz last year in his 4th season. So if that's
okay, that's good
starting point, I'm okay with that.
Absolutely.
Let him develop, let him get a full off season under center or as the center. And there has been a lot of communication issues along the offensive line. and that's been credited by the Cowboys to it being super young and there being a rookie center. So he's got to figure out the declarations a little bit more. He's got to be more commanding as a center, especially now that Dak is not in the game. He's going to have to do a lot more responsibility-wise over these next 7 games, which I think will be good for his progress. But I'm not considering that a miss. No.
So ultimately, the future of this offensive line, are we looking at a case where Tyler Smith is at guard, Cooper Beebe's at center, Tyler Guyton is at right tackle, Chum is at left tackle, and the other guard position, because I think we can both agree this is very likely Zach Martin's last season, given the injuries and the fact that the team just doesn't look, really great for next year. Does that scenario, and then some other player, unnamed player for a guard, does that seem like a realistic scenario for 25?
I don't believe so.
No.
I did a mock draft last night, Mac. It was the first one I've done, so I was trying to wait it out, but I finally did my first.
I can do it.
My first 3 picks. First pick, left tackle. Second pick, defensive tackle. Third pick, guard. If they can come away with 2 offensive linemen in the first, let's say their first 4 or 5 picks, then I think that throws competition back into that room. Let's say that left tackle works out, you can put Tyler Guyton at right tackle. Let's say that guard works out, then boom, there's your right guard moving forward. So I would be surprised if the Cowboys, when they assess their season and they go through these holistic evaluations that they do at the end of the year, I would be surprised if they come away saying that the offensive line does not need addressing on the first 2 days of the draft.
You mentioned wide receiver. I'm surprised you didn't throw a wide receiver in the top 3 picks.
Yeah, and that's something I think you would have to address in free agency. You're letting Brandon Cooks walk at that point. I think you need a big overhaul at the receiver position. I think you go get 2 guys in free agency at wide receiver.
Oh, the guy that I'm looking at is T. Higgins. The Bengals aren't going to bring him back, but he looked awfully good against the Chargers on Sunday night. But they're not going to pay him. The Bengals aren't going to pay him, and neither the Cowboys. Go back. Let's talk about the draft misses. We've seen teams get in trouble if they have runs of classes that miss. When you look at the last class, and I mentioned just 2 guys, in this class, do you think they're vulnerable for one of those dead periods where we're in trouble because they missed on an inordinate number of guys?
I think we're at that point right now.
Right.
I think because part of that analysis last week was the fact that the Cowboys are relying on depth and they're relying on their youth within that depth right now, and that youth is simply not ready. It's simply either not ready or not of caliber.
That's like Chauncey Golston and those guys. Do you see players there?
Chauncey Golston, I think, is a good a guy who I think you could bring back next year. I do. But you look at Luke Schoonmaker, you look at Jalen Brooks, you look at, their 4th round pick from 2022 2023, is no longer in the building in Viliami Fehoko. I don't see a lot from that 2023 draft class that is helping you right now, other than DeMarvion Overshown. And Overshown still has his bumps, but he's playing in his first year in the NFL. I think he is the only one in that draft class that you can look at and be like, okay, he's something you can build around for the future. Other than that, it's 2 undrafted free agents and Hunter Lipke and TJ Bass.
That's brutal. That's such an indictment. And with all those guys, with all those scouts and all these other coaches, and that's what I had a guy, I remember the Cowboys staff tell me in the offseason, he said, that's what all in meant. He meant all in on everybody's on the last year of your deal. Let's see what you can do. Show me what you got. And the problem was the roster was so inadequate that everybody's looking at each other like, apparently we ain't got much. Last question about the Cowboys before we move on to the final topic. Cowboys play at Washington, a team that had been their homecoming opponent for 20 years. Now, Washington, under new ownership, first-year head coach Dan Quinn, and a rookie quarterback who is killing it in Jaden Daniels. Washington is a 10-point favorite against the Cowboys on Sunday in our nation's capital, otherwise known as the dump that is Andover, Maryland, where they play their own games. Any chance at all the Cowboys cover a 10-point spread?
I think they can cover a 10. Am I crazy to think that?
No, 10 is a huge number in the NFL.
It's the first time in 24 years that Washington has been a double-digit favorite over the Cowboys. I found that stat via Bobby Belt yesterday. Thought that was insane.
It's a good one.
I'm expecting Deron Bland and Marshawn Kneeland to be back for this game. I think
okay.
I think there will be a little bit of a jolt defensively, especially when you add in the fact that they are playing against Dan Quinn. I think they cover 10, but I think they lose this one.
Well, the question is, and I put this on Twitter last night, will the Cowboys score 17 points in a game for the rest of the season? Because I think, their defense has shown some spots. They've been okay. And I use that term so liberally. But getting those guys back is going to definitely help. I think Trayvon Diggs is starting to show a little bit better too, considering the injury he was coming back from. Can the offense score 17 points? Can the offense score 20 points? And that's the one. And I mean that. I don't know if they can score 20 points.
Yeah, it's tough. And they'll get Brandon Cooks back eventually. That'll help their receiving game a bit. Does that push them up to 17? Maybe. But I don't. This is not a team that's going to be winning any shootouts anytime soon. I'll tell you that.
I'm going to say what? So you're going to say Dallas will cover 10?
Yes, but I think they lose this game. Maybe like a 20-13 type situation.
Okay, yeah, I could buy that. I think because Washington's coming off of a loss and they need these wins, especially the cheap wins, I think they're going to cover 10. Okay, last topic. The college football rankings continue on, and they are, of course, with controversy because
really?
the SEC. Yeah, I don't know if you knew that or not. I love this topic, but it's infuriating because people are apoplectic about the unfairness of it. First of all, it's not a playoff; it's an invitational. Yeah. So let's start from there. And it is run by the SEC and the Big Ten. So they're going to get more teams than everybody else. And I'm convinced it's the reason why Colorado is not nearly getting the amount of attention that it did this time last year, even though the Buffaloes under Deion Sanders in his second year are far better today than they were 1 year ago. Yeah. The problem is the problem. They play in the Big 12. And if you're not in the SEC or the Big Ten, you're just not going to get as much attention. We've got 3 teams in this state who've got a shot to get in. Texas, Texas A&M, and SMU is leading the ACC. Now, SMU very likely is going to have to beat Miami in the ACC title game to get that bid. Is there any scenario, Nick, where you see Texas, the state of Texas, have 3 teams in the playoff?
I don't think so. I think the loser of that Texas A&M game is out. The reality is probably the winner.
Even if it's Texas, hang on. Even let's say, because that's a night game.
Yeah.
And let's say Texas goes down and they lose by 2. Mm-hmm. The bias for Texas on this is going to be huge. Do you think a narrow loss to A&M would get them in?
I don't think so, because there's a lot of critics around their strength of schedule right now. And I think that's only going to get louder as a playoff decision time comes around and the committee makes their decisions on something. I can see Texas being left out. And even if they are number 3 right now, I learned all the way back in 2014 with TCU, it does not matter if you are number 3 going into the last week of the season.
But it really doesn't matter if the name on the front of your jersey is TCU. I still contend, had that been Oklahoma or Texas, they weren't going to fall out of the top 4.
That's very fair. But I think if A&M handles business in that game, I think that they would probably get in over a Texas. The question I have is, let's say the winner of that game goes to the SEC championship and loses. Does that knock them out of the playoff? And Lane Kiffin has talked about this, and he's basically come out and say, I don't want to play in the SEC championship because that's going to only hurt us. We either get a first-round bye or we're not in the playoff at all. We don't want to risk that. We would rather just play a home game in the first round. And I think that is where you're going to have the most controversy around this playoff, this 12-team playoff in year 1, because you're going to have teams that lose conference championships that will not get in the playoff when 3rd and 4th place teams in the SEC will get in. Yeah.
I mean, and I don't have I have no sympathy for the SEC or the Big Ten. They have completely monopolized college football, and they are running it, which is, that's the golden rule. Those who have the gold rule, and they do. So the part that disappoints me is that SMU is having a great year, and that's a really good team. That's a really good team. And I wrote it. I shouldn't say I did. This one I was ahead on. Never underestimate the power of money. And that program was a top 5 team for 3 years in the 80s when they were paying guys. Well, now you can pay guys without a penalty, and that's why they're good. And I don't know if they can beat Miami. Miami's really good. But let's say if they did, they're going to get in, which is good for them. But if they don't, they have no chance, and that stinks.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I think you look at a team, even it might have a little less sympathy here, but even a team like Boise State, who played Oregon within 3 points at Autzen Stadium.
Oh, yeah.
If they somehow trip up to a really good UNLV or Colorado State team in the Mountain West Championship, they're out, and then that team gets in. So I think that's tough as well. There's going to be 3 or 4 teams that get left out of this thing that you're thinking they're better than that team. They're better than that team. So it's just welcome to big money college football, Mac, and it's only going to
pretty much. No, but I'm glad you brought up the Boise State thing, because Boise State's schedule, and they had Oregon beat. They could have beat Oregon, and Oregon's terrific. But I hope they get in. I hope they win a game. I think it's great I think those upsets are great for college football. I think TCU beating Michigan was great for college football. I think Boise State winning the Fiesta Bowl over Oklahoma was great for college. I think all those are great for college football, because in the end, much like the NCAA tournament, you basically have Walmart beating Target. And you're like, okay, these are just 2 big giant, or Goldman Sachs beating up Morgan Stanley. Okay, it's neat, but they're basically the same thing. Okay, we've got more to talk about next week when the Dallas Cowboys go to Washington to see if they can cover a 10-point spread. Nick will be in our nation's capital. I won't be, and that's perfectly okay. Nick, thanks for your time. Thank you for your Window Nation for all of your Cowboys coverage needs on this terrific 2024 season. Be sure to check us out on StarTelegram.com. We will see you next week.